right, moving on to parts of the digestive system, the oral cavity. The oral cavity contains the hard and soft palate, uvula, tongue, salivary glands, and teeth. In the oral cavity, chewing is performed. Also, the digestions of lipids by lingual lipase and the digestion of carbohydrates by salivary amylase. The soft palate closes off the nasopharynx during swallowing to prevent fluids and food from entering the nasal cavity. The uvula secretes saliva and elicits the gag reflex if touched. So if you ever wondered what that uvula does, now you know. The tongue contains extrinsic muscles that perform gross movements and help with mechanical digestion of food. That is things like smushing food, mashing food, swirling it around. The tongue also contains intrinsic muscles that change the shape of the tongue and help with speech. The hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve 12, controls both group of muscles. The tongue has glands that secrete lingual lipase. It contains taste buds that detect sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, which means like meaty or savory, and water. That's the latest one that they've added to the list. The facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus cranial nerves carry information about taste, and the tongue also senses touch and temperature, as we have all burnt our tongues and we so painfully know, or we've bit our tongue. The three nerves are shown here. It's shown that the facial nerve in purple carries taste from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. The glossopharyngeal nerve in blue carries taste from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, and the vagus nerve carries taste from the oropharynx, beyond the tongue, lower down in the throat. So that's interesting. Okay, teeth. During development from birth to adulthood, two sets of teeth form. Deciduous, or baby teeth, erupt through the gums first. They fall out or are pushed out by the eruption of around 32 permanent teeth. Permanent or adult teeth include incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, moving from the anterior to the posterior of the oral cavity. And here we have an interesting two pictures showing that the ages at which different teeth erupt. So babies get their two front teeth or their two lower teeth at around 6 to 7 months, and then those teeth fall out, and kids get their two front teeth at age about 7 to 8, at which point they start looking really goofy because they have two big teeth in their mouth and the rest of their teeth are little. However, doesn't seem to bother them much because at that point they don't really care if they look goofy. They probably kind of like it. Okay, mastication. The major function of teeth is mastication or chewing. The muscles of mastication, to remind ourselves, are the masseter temporalis, medial and lateral pterygoid, and buccinator muscles around the lips and the tongue all help. Okay, moving down to the pharynx and the esophagus. So the pharynx or throat has three parts: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. Usually the nasopharynx is described with the respiratory system, and the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx are discussed with the digestive system. The oropharynx and laryngopharynx carry food, liquids, and saliva to the esophagus. The pharynx also carries air to the trachea. There are many pharyngeal muscles that are involved in the protection of the nasal cavity and trachea, the production of speech, and swallowing. We will not learn them. That is a relief, huh? I will just talk about three groups of them, and I would like you to understand the three groups. Soft palate elevators lift the soft palate to protect the nasopharynx. Laryngeal elevators lift the larynx to fold the epiglottis over the trachea. Pharyngeal constrictors push a bolus of food towards the esophagus. And that's it. We just grouped them. That's all you have to know about the muscles in the pharynx. Okay, the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube that extends from the pharynx to the stomach. It is around 10 inches long and around an inch in diameter. It lies behind the trachea. It has an upper esophageal sphincter and a lower esophageal sphincter. It enters the abdominal cavity by passing through the esophageal hiatus of the diaphragm. And you may remember when you drew the diaphragm during the muscles unit that you drew the esophageal hiatus in your picture because it goes through the diaphragm. So you drew it. The mucosa of the esophagus includes non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium and a lamina propria. The submucosa contains submucosal glands that produce mucus. And if you would take a look at the histology slide that's showing a whole entire esophagus on the left, and note the part of the esophagus that's the mucosa, and then what part is the submucosa, what part is the muscular layer, and finally the adventitia. And notice that in the zoomed in part of this picture, we're only looking at the mucosa in the top half, and then the muscularis mucosa, which is just under the mucosa. So we never even get to the submucosa in this picture. Okay, it's just the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. I find that the esophagus's layers can be a little challenging. That's why I'm calling your attention to the layers in more detail. The mucosa and submucosa form longitudinal folds that let the esophagus expand for large food boluses. And you can see multiple folds in the histological picture that shows the entire esophagus. And then there's a cartoon, kind of pointing out the longitudinal folds. The internal, circular, and external longitudinal muscular layers of the esophagus have skeletal muscle fibers in the upper third, a mix of skeletal and smooth muscle in the middle third, and smooth muscle in the bottom third. Both the skeletal and smooth muscles are under involuntary control, and waves of peristalsis move a bolus of food from the pharynx to the stomach. The esophagus is innervated by the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10. Swallowing. Swallowing is a complex process with three phases: the buccal, pharyngeal, and esophageal phases. The buccal phase is the only voluntary part of swallowing. And remember, buccal means cheek, so they're talking about pretty much the oral cavity part of swallowing. In the buccal phase, the tongue retracts and the soft palate elevates, and food is pushed to the oral pharynx. In the pharyngeal phase, the larynx elevates, closing the epiglottis over the trachea. Respiration is inhibited. This phase is involuntary. In the esophageal phase, the upper esophageal sphincter opens. The bolus of food is moved down the esophagus by a wave of peristalsis. The lower esophageal sphincter opens and the bolus enters the stomach. This phase is involuntary also. Okay, the stomach. The stomach is found in the left upper quadrant of the abdomen, as we learned like in the first lecture. It is intraperitoneal. It has several regions: the cardia, fundus, body, and pylorus. The pyloric sphincter is found between the stomach and duodenum. The stomach has a lesser curvature medially and a greater curvature laterally. The stomach has gastric rugae, or folds, or wrinkles, formed by the mucosa and submucosa. The rugae permit expansion of the stomach, and a stretched stomach has less prominent rugae because they've been stretched flat. The stomach has three muscular layers instead of two. It has an inner oblique layer, a middle circular layer, and an outer longitudinal layer. The extra inner oblique layer helps with the churning and mixing that is done by the stomach. Here's just a big old Martini's poster about the stomach. All right, the mucosa of the stomach has a simple columnar epithelium, as does the whole rest of the digestive tract, all the way to like the last inch of the anus. But I'm going to tell you over and over again, and it does look a bit different how the simple columnar epithelium is arranged throughout the digestive system. So in the stomach, the mucous epithelial cells, or mucous surface cells, line the stomach. They secrete mucus to protect the stomach from acids and enzymes. And you see here we have a picture of mucous epithelial cells. So they're called that because they all produce mucus. They're not secreting or absorbing enzymes or nutrients. They're just secreting a whole lot of mucus onto the surface of the stomach to protect it from acids and enzymes. Below the surface epithelium, gastric pits and deeper gastric glands are found in the lamina propria. Gastric pits contain mucous neck cells that secrete mucus, so more protection from the acid and enzymes that are being made by the gastric glands. The gastric pits also contain stem cells that continually replace the mucous epithelial cells on the surface, which, even though they're covered with mucus, still are commonly damaged and need to be replaced. The gastric glands contain three types of secretory cells: parietal cells, chief cells, and G cells. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Hydrochloric acid kills microorganisms. It breaks down plant cell walls and the connective tissue in meat and denatures or unravels proteins. It activates pepsinogen. Intrinsic factor is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12 from the ileum, and vitamin B12 is important for producing red blood cells. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen, which is converted to pepsin by hydrochloric acid. Pepsin is an enzyme that digests proteins. G cells produce gastrin. Gastrin stimulates parietal cells to release hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor, and chief cells to secrete pepsinogen. So, yeah, those are the three kinds of cells. The functions of the stomach are mechanical digestion by churning and chemical digestion by acid and enzymes. The stomach does not usually absorb any nutrients. Some substances damage the mucosa of the stomach and enter the blood. Okay, in a in a special way, a little bit of a damaging special way. And these substances include alcohol, aspirin, and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen. So you may hear sometimes that people, get ulcers or kind of like depressions and then ultimately holes in their stomach. And that can occur from prolonged aspirin and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory use that people sometimes need for other conditions. However, it's a dangerous, side effect. Gastric motility and the production of stomach acid and enzymes are controlled by the autonomic nervous system and local hormones. Parasympathetic stimulation through the vagus nerve is triggered by the sight and thought of food. It increases secretion of mucus, hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen, and gastrin. It increases gastric motility. Sympathetic stimulation decreases gastric activity of all kinds. Okay, control of stomach functions. In the stomach, food is turned into chyme, which is a soupy mixture of food, acid, and enzymes. Chyme is a bit similar to vomit. Chyme passes from the stomach into the duodenum through the pyloric sphincter. The autonomic nervous system and local hormones help control the passage of chyme into the duodenum. You don't want too large a bolus of chyme passing through the pyloric sphincter at once, because, as we'll find out, the duodenum has to decrease the amount of acid in the chyme and mix the chyme with bile and pancreatic enzymes. So you can't just dump a lot of chyme into the duodenum willy-nilly. Okay, the blood supply to the stomach. The blood supply to the stomach is from the abdominal aorta to the celiac trunk to the left gastric artery. The stomach is also supplied by branches of the splenic and hepatic arteries. All right, small intestines.